Hey guys, Tom here. So I wanted to shoot a little video on PCs, laptops, components and what technology you might need to get your business up and running. I was doing a little thinking recently on some of the things that I could potentially talk about and ways I could give value back to others. And something that I've always been really passionate about ever since I was a little kid is technology. I've always been building PCs, playing about with different components. So I've got a pretty good understanding in terms of, what does what and what you might need to look for if you're maybe looking at buying a laptop, for example, for your business. So the first thing you really need to ask yourself if you're picking a new computer or laptop, whatever it might be, is what are you looking to achieve with it? And be realistic here, because you don't want to end up spending more money than you need. We see everyone these days with the latest MacBook Airs. You don't need a MacBook Air. Disclaimer, you do not need a MacBook Air to start a business. It seems to be this just thing that everyone has to have, right? I'm not a big fan of Macs. I use just a Windows PC. I use Asus because they're generally very high spec, decent build quality. So that's always a good option for me. And they're much more reasonable price range as well. The thing is with Mac, they're very slick user experience. I'll give them that. However, you do pay a lot more for the same components. And it's usually because they make them so slick and they do have a slightly more optimized operating system and user interface. But if you're looking to save a bit of money, you can get a very, very high spec PC but on a Windows platform. So it's worth looking at that. Now, in terms of what you're actually going to be doing with it, you need to ask yourself, are you somebody that's going to be doing a lot of video editing? Is that the route you're going down? Are you looking to go into YouTube? Because if you are, then you might want to get something that is capable of video editing. Now, for video editing, you want to be looking at something like an Intel Core i5 or i7 processor at the minimum, really. Because it really does take a lot of processing power in the rendering stages of these videos. You also want to have pretty decent RAM as well. 4 gigabytes is an absolute minimum. You'll find that in pretty much any laptop these days anyway, but I'd suggest going for something 8 gigabyte or above if you can. It's also important that it's got a relatively good GPU, video card, graphics card. There's some different makes, we'll call them different things. But I'd suggest going for one with a dedicated GPU, because you do sometimes get ones which are part of the CPU, which is the central processor, but they're not going to be as efficient for those kind of rendering tasks. So if you can find one that's got a dedicated, and it will usually say on there, dedicated GPU with its own memory, I'd suggest going for one of those for sure. You also need to factor in the storage as well. Now, this might not be a massive issue because you might have an external hard drive. Another thing to look out for, which is a nice added benefit to have, is something called an SSD, which is a solid state drive, which has much faster read and write speeds. So it means it can pull data off of the hard drive a lot quicker, but it can also write files to the hard drive a lot quicker. So if you're saving something, for example, it's going to get those tasks done a lot quicker. And you also, you're opening up apps, and your PC will boot up a lot quicker. So, it's good for all of those things, really. So they're going to be the main things to look out for. So the RAM, the processor, the graphics card, and the hard drive. But again, you need to really ask yourself what you're going to be using the PC for, because if you're only going to be using it to write blogs, you really don't need some of that equipment. You could probably get away with a small little notebook with a small display, probably an i3 processor, and AMD. This is another so there's Intel and AMD. They're the two sort of major chip manufacturers for the processors. AMD have some pretty good technology as well. I'd recommend Intel if you're going for the more CPU intensive tasks, because they tend to be quite far ahead in terms of the actual processing power and efficiency. But again, if you're only going to be writing blogs, then it really does just give you more spectrum. And pretty much all laptops these days are going to come with the minimum 4 gigabytes of RAM that you need. It doesn't really matter having an onboard or dedicated graphics card if you're only going to be doing blogs and a couple of bits on your WordPress site and things like that. So again, it all comes down to asking yourself, what are you going to be using it for? And be realistic, because you don't want to end up spending thousands and thousands of pounds on a laptop, which you can quite easily do these days, if you're not going to be using it to its full potential. Now, another little pointer I'd give as well is, whilst it's good to have something portable, right, and something sleek, be careful of this, because Apple got caught out recently, I think it was on one of the new MacBook Air models, where they crammed a new i9 processor, which is one of Intel's latest processors, into this laptop. But the MacBook Air series are very, very thin laptops, right? They're very sleek. And because they're cramming so much power into such a small space, it gets very, very hot. And, you know, regardless of the fans and the cooling they put in there, it can't quite cope. And from some tests they did when they were using the processor to its full potential through things like benchmarking, they found that because the laptop was getting so hot, something called thermal throttling occurs, which is where the processor actually has to slow itself down in order to prevent damage to the chip itself. So you're not actually being able to use that processor to its full potential anyway. So, you know, if you do need a high spec PC, you're going to have to make sacrifices. And you know, it might, if you need that kind of laptop or PC or that kind of tech, you probably know a bit about that anyway. But just be careful in terms of, you know, is it realistic, you know, in that kind of form factor you're getting. If you're getting a tiny laptop, you want something portable, you are usually going to have to make sacrifices in terms of the actual power and performance you'll get from that laptop. But anyway, I hope that helps. Feel free to reach out to me or message me if you've got any questions about anything like this. I'm more than happy to help, and I always love talking about tech. So yeah, feel free to reach out, and I'll speak to you guys soon. See you later. Hey guys, so it just occurred to me as I finished that video, it'd probably be useful to give you a bit of a rundown of some of the specs. I've just pulled up an example here. So let's start with the specification, just so you know what to look out for. So this one in particular has got an Intel Core i7 processor. This is the main bit you need to look for, really. This particular bit is just the model number of the chip. I mean, you'll generally find that the higher the number with these core processors, the better it's going to be, the more powerful it's going to be. Don't really need to worry about that so much. If you know you're into all that, you can just tap the particular model into Google and look up some reviews of the performance of that particular chip. Some of, you know, you will find occasional ones where they do have inherent problems with overheating and things like that, but generally these processors are pretty good. You know, anything I'd say an Intel Core i5, i7 or even i9 processors are the kind of top of the range one at the moment. This is the clock speed of the processor, which effectively is how fast it can run. The cache is just, I mean, 8 meg cache is pretty standard, really. It's just what the similar to a cache you get in your web browser. So it just sort of stores data so it can more efficiently and effectively call up those processing tasks. Turbo boost, so that's just how fast the clock speed can go up to. And then here you've got quad core, which just means the processor has multiple cores, and pretty much all of these new processors now have or run on multi-core technology. It just means it can run more efficiently. It runs cooler, it's less power consumption, so that's going to be pretty standard on any laptop you look at these days. So here is the memory. So this is what you want to look for, really, the actual size of the memory itself. So 8 gigabytes. Again, that's pretty, I think the minimum I've seen on laptops these days is 4 gig. So you're pretty much covered there. 8 gig, you know, onwards really is what I'd consider to be pretty good for a laptop. DDR4, you don't really need to worry about that. That's just the new kind of standard of memory at the moment. I've just moved that up from DDR3. So I think most laptops these days are running DDR4. You might get a couple of DDR3. It's not really a huge difference. Again, if you're interested, you can Google the benchmarks and see the results and kind of timings. But it's not really a massive difference, to be fair. but as long as you've got a decent size memory. And this one's quite nice as well because it's expandable. So, you know, as we know, technology becomes more and more demanding, or software becomes more and more demanding, should I say, by the day. So, you know, it's always nice to be able to expand it without having to go out and buy a whole new laptop. Next is the hard drive. Now, this is something you'll notice. This is an SSD drive, so a solid state drive, like I mentioned. Now, they've moved away from the old, what was known as disk drives, and they actually used a sort of spinning disk to cool data. Solid state drives are more just electronic, so it can access the data much faster. This is what you want to be looking for. So this is the actual storage space, so 256 gigabytes. So, I mean, anything with an SSD, you generally tend to find the storage is lower, because what people will tend to do is to have external storage now, whether that be on a portable hard drive, maybe a USB stick. But the SSDs are generally going to be slightly lower on storage. What you might also find with some of them is that it's actually got a separate hard drive specifically for storage, which will usually be a disk-based drive as well. You'll see an additional number there, which might be like 7,200 RPM, which is just the revolutions of the disk itself. You don't really need to worry about that. 7,200 tends to be the standard or minimum. So software, this is running on Windows 10, which is Windows' current and latest operating system. Display, again, that might not really mean that much to you. Anti-glare is always nice to have. 250 nits, that's just the brightness. You've got the size there, the resolution it can go up to, so 1080, so it's full HD. You will see some of them these days with 4K screens as well. Doesn't really matter on a laptop. It's pretty overkill for a laptop, really, but yeah, you'll find some of that on, especially on the gaming laptops, you see. So graphics, so Intel HD graphics, that's what I was mentioning to you about the sort of onboard graphics chips you get. This one has actually got a dedicated graphics chip as well, so an NVIDIA GeForce. These are pretty good chips. You know, if you're going to be doing video processing or something like that, it's good to have a dedicated graphics chip. You can see it's got 2 gigabytes of dedicated video memory as well, so it doesn't have to sort of pull that from your RAM. What else have we got? Audio, built-in speaker, built-in array microphone, nothing special there. Power supply. Another thing to look out for in these, I mean, even though the specification of the battery does tell you somewhat how long it might last for, it's always good to Google the model of the laptop just to see the tests, you know, and how it performs under, you know, under stress and under real life conditions, to get an idea of how long the battery is going to last, because the times that the manufacturer often gives aren't going to be completely 100% accurate. So that's something I'll always do. I'll just type in the model number of the laptop, look at some reviews and see what kind of life expectancy you can get from a laptop, if that's important to you. You know, again, it comes down to what you're going to be using it for, where are you going to be using it. You're going to be using it out and about quite a lot. You're not going to have access to charging points, so that's something you might want to think of. Here you've got the interfaces, so pretty well equipped. You'll find that a lot of the laptops now won't have a massive amount of ports on them, because again, they are going for the kind of slimmer, sleeker design. USB is not really a huge issue, because you can actually get USB hubs or extension ports, whatever you want to call them. So you plug in a USB and then you'll have an additional sort of 5 ports that plugs onto the end of your laptop. You get them off Amazon for, you know, a couple of quid probably. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, because you can just always buy one of those. USB 3, oh, it's got Type-C connector, that's quite cool. So that's something you're going to see in a lot of phones these days, Type-C connectors, Android phones anyway. USB 3 is basically just higher transfer speeds. So you'll see this, I mean, over and above USB 2. If you're plugging in an external hard drive, for example, it's good to use a USB 3 port for that. because you're going to get faster transfer speeds. You're not going to be waiting around all day to move your files. You've also got HDMI, which just means you can plug it straight into a TV. Some of the really old ones used VGA, but to be honest, a lot of TVs actually have VGA connectivity anyway. VGA web camera. This is the only problem with Asus laptops at the moment, to be honest, is their webcams are crap. VGA is very, very low resolution quality for a laptop. You know, you'll see it will probably, you know, be in like 720p, 1080p. 1080p is what you want to go for ideally. The VGA is pretty poor quality. It's very low resolution. But, you know, you can get external webcams as well, so it's not a deal breaker. Anything else I've missed? Networking. It's got Bluetooth. So Bluetooth 4.1 again. I think 4.1 is the latest standard. It's one of the most recent ones anyway, so you shouldn't have any connectivity issues with that. That's just the Wi-Fi chip. Again, these, you won't really have any issues with these days. They're all up to the latest standards. What else have we got? Oh, optical. Yeah, I mean, optical drive, again, this is something that you're going to find on most laptops at the moment. They won't come with on an optical drive is just a CD drive or DVD drive. So a lot of laptops these days don't have them. One, because it keeps manufacturing costs down. Two, because it allows them to make the laptop smaller and thinner and lighter. And three, because people don't really use DVDs and CDs anymore. You know, people keep their stuff on USB sticks, or they stream movies, so there's just not really a need for it. If it is something you're going to need, it might be something you need to look out for. Again, just expect a heavier and possibly bulkier laptop as well. And I think that's about it, really. Again, like the clock speed of the RAM, you don't really need to worry about that so much. You know, unless you're going into the very high-end sector and you're wanting to game with it or do some very advanced video processing, in which case you probably know a bit about this stuff anyway. That is about it, really. I hope that helps. Let me just see if there's anything else. We've got the model numbers of the laptop here. Again, it's always, I always find it useful just to sometimes tap these models into Google and look at a few reviews of them, because you can get a better idea of how they, you know, perform under stress and under, you know, real life circumstances. So yeah, that's it. eBuy is also a very good site if you're looking to buy any tech. They're generally very cheap and they have some of the top brands on there as well. So yeah, that's it, guys. Hope it helps, and I'll speak to you all soon. See you later.